The note was still in my hand when midnight came. I'd read it 6 times between 9 p.m. and 11:30, which is not something I'd recommend doing with a piece of paper from a woman who had made it her professional mission to make my working life significantly harder. It was written in red pen, of course it was, on a torn piece of notepaper, and the handwriting was neat until the last line, which was underlined twice. She underlined things when she meant them. I had learned this the hard way across 14 months of shared conference tables and opposing slide decks. I went up to the roof. My name is Owen Callahan. I'm 36. I'm a senior strategist at an urban development consultancy, which means I spend my days building cases for how cities should use space, and then defending those cases against people who have built different cases for how cities should use space differently. It is, Marcus tells me, an extremely specific job to be extremely intense about. Marcus is not wrong. I am, apparently, extremely intense about it. I have been told this by 3 separate performance reviews, a therapist I saw for 8 months, and the woman who left the note. Her name is Jess Navarro. She joined the firm 14 months ago as a senior strategist. Same title, different team, overlapping jurisdiction, which the partners thought was a feature and which turned out to be a war conducted entirely through footnotes and presentation slides. She was 33. She had a red pen she kept behind her ear during meetings like it was a piece of architecture and not a writing instrument. And she used it to annotate everything, margins of reports, edges of agendas. Once the back of someone's printed email when no other surface was available. She was fast and sharp and wrong about approximately 40% of things, and she argued the other 60% with a precision that I found professionally inconvenient and personally. I stopped cataloging that thought around month 3. It wasn't useful. How we became rivals is less dramatic than it sounds. There was a pitch, the Garfield District redevelopment, a project that would define the next 2 years for whoever led it. We both presented. The partners split the contract between us, which they framed as a collaborative opportunity, and which we both understood as a decision made by people who wanted credit for neither outcome. Jess took the Eastern Corridor. I took the West. We were meant to integrate our approaches by Q3. It was now Q4, and our approaches had integrated approximately as well as 2 tectonic plates. We had a system. It was a cold, functional, technically professional system. We communicated by email with response times that were slightly too fast to be casual and slightly too clipped to be warm. We did not discuss anything that was not on an agenda. She borrowed my conference room once without asking and left a red pen mark on the whiteboard that I was certain was intentional. I moved her name to the bottom of the distribution list for a report she didn't technically need. We were both adults. The crack happened on a Wednesday at 7 p.m. when everyone else had gone home. I was finishing a section of the integration brief, the one that was due Friday and that I had been quietly dreading because it required, structurally, that I acknowledge her corridor work as foundational to the Western approach, which it was, technically, and which I had been finding creative ways to footnote around. I heard her come back in. She'd left at 6. I didn't look up. I heard her sit down at the glass-walled desk across the open floor. And then there was nothing. No keyboard, no phone call, nothing. Just the particular silence of a person who is staring at something they can't figure out. After about 10 minutes, I looked up. She was sitting with both elbows on the desk and both hands over her face, and the red pen was on the desk in front of her, not behind her ear, which was how I knew it was actually bad. I should have looked back down. That was the correct professional decision. I did not make it. "What happened?" I said. She looked up. Her expression said several things in quick sequence, the last of which was something like, "Why are you talking to me?" Nothing. Something. She looked at the screen. The Eastern Corridor numbers. The density modeling doesn't hold if the transit link approval gets delayed past February. And the council meeting got pushed. I said nothing for a moment. The thing she was describing was also a problem for my western section, though in a different way. And I had been running the same numbers in the background for 3 days. "How far does it move if you recalculate with a May approval?" I said. She looked at me like I'd said something in a language she hadn't expected me to speak. 6 to 8% off the residential projection, which kills the density argument, which is the whole Eastern case. Not if you run it parallel to the commercial buffer, I said. If you push the residential density into the northern quadrant, it holds even at May. You lose the mixed-use model, but the overall numbers survive. She stared at me. That's my quadrant. I know it's your quadrant. I turned back to my screen. It's a good quadrant. The numbers work. There was a long silence. "Why are you telling me this?" she said, carefully, like the question was actually important. I didn't have a useful answer for that. I said, "Friday deadline," and kept typing. Which was true. It was also not the whole truth. But Friday was a real deadline, and that part didn't need examining. She didn't say thank you. She went back to her screen. But she picked the red pen up and put it back behind her ear, which I had learned meant the crisis had passed. I noted this and returned to my own work and did not think about it further. I did think about it further. I thought about it Thursday morning when I passed her in the kitchen, and she said, "Northern quadrant holds," without looking up from the coffee machine, which was apparently how she said thank you. I thought about it Thursday afternoon when she forwarded me a transit data report with no subject line and no message body, which was apparently how she said you were right, and this proves it. I thought about it Thursday evening when I saw her jacket still on her chair at 7:30 p.m. and felt something I categorized as, "She works too hard," and then recatalogued as, "I am paying attention to her jacket," and that is a new development. I went home Thursday night and told myself that 14 months of professional combat had simply produced a contextual familiarity, and that contextual familiarity was not the same thing as anything else, and that the Friday deadline was the reason all of this felt heightened. I was very convincing. I have poor survival instincts around women who argue with me about transit infrastructure and turn out to be right about 30% more things than I'd been giving them credit for. The note was under my door Friday morning. I found it before my coffee, which was the wrong order of operations. I picked it up off the mat and unfolded it, and the red pen was immediately identifiable, and it said, "Meet me on the roof at midnight. Come alone, J." And then, below that, underlined twice, "Please." I stared at the please for a long time. Jess Navarro did not add please to things as a reflex. She added please when she had calculated that it was the correct word and meant it in a specific and considered way. The underline was twice. She had underlined it twice, and that was the whole message. This was not a meeting about transit approvals. I spent the day at the office pretending to be a person for whom the Friday deadline was the primary concern. She was across the floor. She didn't look at me differently than she usually did, which with Jess meant she looked at me exactly as long as necessary and not 1 second longer, which I had previously interpreted as professional economy and was now reinterpreting in a way I wasn't fully prepared to formalize. We submitted the brief at 4 p.m. Her section and mine locked together at the integration point like they'd been designed that way, which they hadn't been, 14 months ago. But we're now. One of the partners emailed us both at 4:45 to say it was unexpectedly cohesive. I did not look across the floor when I read that. I was almost certain she was looking at her screen with no expression at all, which was her expression for things she found satisfying. I went home. I ate. I sat on my couch and looked at the note and the clock and made a series of very adult, rational decisions about what this probably was and why I should approach it calmly. At 11:55, I took the stairs to the roof. She was already there. She was standing at the far edge with her arms crossed and her jacket on, the city behind her. And she looked like a woman who had made a decision and was now experiencing the specific discomfort of having to follow through on it. The red pen was behind her ear. I noticed this immediately and said nothing about it. "You came," she said. "You underlined it twice," I said. She looked at the city. "The brief is done." "It is. Which means we're no longer working in opposition. Technically." She was quiet. The wind was doing something to her hair that she wasn't bothering to fix. "Owen. Jess. I need to say something, and I need you to not make it strange. I make very few things strange. You make most things strange," she said. That's actually..." She stopped. She looked at her feet and then back at the city and then, finally, at me. Her arms were still crossed, which I knew by now was not coldness, but the opposite. The posture of a person keeping something inside. "Thursday night," she said, "after the office. I was on the phone with my sister and she asked why I sounded. She said I sounded like I was trying to think through something I already knew the answer to." A pause. She asked if it was about work. Was it? "It was about the Northern Quadrant," she said. "And why you told me." I said nothing. And I said there was this person at work who I'd been. And my sister said, "Is this the one you argue with?" And I said yes. And she said, "Jess, you don't argue that hard about things you don't care about." And I said that was different. She looked at me. And she said, "Is it?" I held very still. "I've been carrying the red pen since my first week," she said, quieter now. "I annotate everything. You're the only person at the firm who ever noticed what it means when it's on the desk versus behind my ear. You noticed in month 2. She stopped. "That's a specific kind of attention." My chest did the thing it had been doing since the Northern Quadrant, and that I had been incorrectly blaming on the Friday deadline. "You don't have to keep going," I said. "We can go back downstairs and call it a late Friday debrief, and it doesn't have to be anything." She looked at me for a long moment. The city lights were doing something to her expression that made it harder to read than usual. She uncrossed her arms. "I wrote 3 versions of that note," she said. "I burned 2. A pause. "The 3rd one has the word please in it. I don't add please to things." "I know," I said. "Then you know what it cost." Something in me stopped pretending. The whole machinery of professional distance, the footnotes, the clipped emails, the deliberately managed response times, all of it, at once, just stopped. "Month 3, I said. "You presented the Eastern Corridor case to the partners, and you were wrong about the density baseline, and you knew it before the slide finished loading. I watched you recalculate in real time and adjust the framing mid-sentence. No one else saw it." I looked at her. I thought about that for 3 days. She was very still. "Every brief I've written for 14 months, I said. "I've written against your argument in my head first. Because your argument is the one that's actually worth beating." I paused. That started as strategy. It stopped being strategy around month 6. She let out a breath, slow, quiet, the kind that's been held for a while. I argued so hard on the Garfield submission, she said, almost to herself. I kept thinking if I could make you see the Eastern case clearly. She stopped. I think I just wanted you to see it. Not even agree, just see it. I saw it in month 4, I said. I argued anyway. She laughed once, short, real, and looked at the rooftop under her feet. And something in her face changed into something I hadn't been given access to before. Not the professional Jess. Not the rival Jess. Just Jess, on a roof at midnight, who had underlined the word please twice and come up early to wait. I stepped toward her. She didn't step back. I reached out and she looked at my hand, and then at me, and then she took it. Deliberate, decided, the way she did everything. We stood there for a while. The city made its usual Friday night noise below us. After a minute, she said, without moving, I left the pen mark on your whiteboard on purpose. I know, I said. And you moved my name to the bottom of the distribution list. You weren't on the distribution list at all, I said. I added you at the bottom. That's technically a promotion. She made a sound that was very close to a laugh. You're insufferable. You wrote me a midnight note, I said. You don't get to call me insufferable for at least 6 months. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out with one hand, still holding mine with the other, looked at the screen, and made a face. My sister, she said. She wants to know how the roof went. She looked at me. I may have mentioned the note to her. What are you going to tell her? Jess looked at the phone, and then at the city, and then at me. And she smiled. The real one. The one I'd seen only a few times in 14 months, always by accident, always gone before I could do anything about it. I'm going to tell her she was right, she said. I'll make sure she doesn't enjoy it too much. She texted her sister. I did not read over her shoulder. I was, however, in a position to see the screen, and her sister had already replied with 4 consecutive exclamation points, which was a level of enthusiasm that suggested Jess had been discussing this for longer than she would admit. Jess put the phone away, with the expression of someone whose sister had just won an argument and was going to mention it for years. We stayed on the roof until 1 a.m. She explained everything that was wrong with the Western Corridor approach in the original brief and was correct about most of it. I explained what the Northern Quadrant could have supported that she hadn't used, and she took the red pen out from behind her ear without thinking and made a note on the back of her hand, which is something I had never seen her do before, and which was, I decided, a very good sign. 4 months later, the Garfield District brief was approved. The partners called it the strongest integrated submission the firm had produced in a decade, and they said Callahan-Navarro approach, as if that was a category that had always existed. At the celebration dinner, her hand found mine under the table, in the same deliberate way it had on the roof, decided no announcement. And I thought about month 3 when I'd watched her recalculate mid-sentence and told myself it was nothing and been wrong by a significant margin. A year after the roof, she still had the red pen. She'd bought 3 backup versions after I asked what would happen if it ran out, which she called an extremely unromantic concern, and which I called risk management, and which she agreed was, very characteristically, both. The pen lived behind her ear at the office and on my kitchen counter at home, and once inexplicably in the pocket of my coat for a week, which she denied until she couldn't. 2 years later, when her sister asked, as she continued to ask, at every family dinner, with the energy of someone who had been right once and intended to make it permanent, Jess always said, he helped me fix the Eastern Corridor, and then I had to go ruin everything by noticing. I always said, she underlined please twice. I knew before I got to the roof. Both versions are true. We just have different definitions of when it started. She says month 11, the Wednesday at 7 p.m. I say month 3, mid-sentence, wrong density baseline, 1 recalculation, and a red pen behind an ear. I've never told her that. She'll annotate it. What would you have done if your work rival left you a note like that? Meet me at midnight, come alone. And have you ever had someone in your life that you argued with so hard, for so long, that you only realized too late it was because they mattered? Tell me in the comments. If this one landed, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.